British politicians have been talking tough on Russia, and the major weapon our leaders have been talking up as a means to discourage a potential Russian incursion in Ukraine are sanctions.
We have a hard-hitting package of sanctions ready to go. What I think it'd be fair to say is we want to see our European friends ready to deploy that package as soon as there should be any incursion at all by Russia into Ukraine.
What I'll be announcing later this week is improved legislation on sanctions so we can target more Russian interests that are of direct relevance to the Kremlin, because we absolutely need to stop this happening. That is our number one priority. Currently, the economic sanctions are fairly narrowly drawn, so we could only target companies with a direct involvement in destabilising Ukraine. What we are looking to do is widen that, so any company of interest to the Kremlin and the regime in Russia would be able to be targeted. So there will be nowhere to hide for Putin's oligarchs, for Russian companies involved in propping up the Russian state. That's what we are looking at doing this week.
We've been very clear. We will bring in more sanctions. That's one of the repercussions there will be.
Yeah, but my question is, why are we waiting?
We already have some sanctions against Russia already. We've already taken the power in the last week or so with the statutory instrument in Parliament to allow the UK government to put more sanctions in place.
So the position is that the UK has prepared a package of hard-hitting sanctions that could be deployed the moment Russia sets foot in Ukraine, or at least that's what we're being asked to believe. However, the rest of the world has its doubts that the UK will ever impose any real economic consequences on Russia's ruling class. Why? Because we are too heavily involved in and economically reliant on laundering Russian money. This was a recent headline in The Times. Ukraine crisis, US sounds alarm over Russian dirty money in London. The article quotes a US diplomatic source as saying the fear is that Russian money is so entrenched in London now that the opportunity to use it as leverage against Putin could be lost. Biden is talking about sanctioning Putin himself, but that can only be symbolic. Putin doesn't hold his money abroad. It is all in the kleptocrats' names, and a hell of a lot of it is sitting in houses in Knightsbridge and Belgravia, right under your government's noses. Liz Truss was asked whether any proposed sanctions would include property seizures.
Would that include, for example, the capacity to seize property, which may not be very far from where we're sitting here, which is worth hundreds of millions of pounds, in the hands of Putin's oligarch pals who've put their money into London property?
Nothing is off the table. And we're not going to go into details of exactly who and how we would target the sanctions. What the legislation enables us to do is hit a much wider variety of targets, so there can be nobody who thinks that they will be immune to those sanctions.
I don't want to seem obsessed with the property, other people's property, but, you know, we've said a lot of this before, after the Salisbury poisoning, for example, and so on. And it seems that we haven't really done very much to hurt the people who have got all those big houses in Belgravia or who have large deposits in London banks. Is the problem here that, in truth, you might say you want to do this, but the cost of it to this country is dramatic? For every Russian oligarch whose accounts are frozen, that means that somebody isn't going to get investment from that Russian money in this country, for example, to support the levelling up agenda. Is that the problem, that it's going to cost us to do this?
We have seized over £1 billion worth of assets, and we have put sanctions in place on specific individuals. But what I'm saying, Trevor, is we want to do more. Want to do more, and that is why we are legislating to broaden our sanctions. And fundamentally, the most important thing is defending freedom and democracy, and that is more important than immediate financial issues. And that is true not just for the United Kingdom, but also for our friends in Germany, who are now taking a much tougher line on Nord Stream 2. You know, we cannot favour short-term economic interests over the long-term survival of freedom and democracy in Europe.
A lesson in complete evasion there when it came to the concrete issues she was being asked about. In the summer of 2020, the Intelligence and Security Committee of Parliament released a report on the security risks that Russia represents to the UK. You might remember this as the so-called Russia report that Boris Johnson's government refused to publish before the 2019 elections. They found that, in brief, Russian influence in the UK is the new normal, and there are a lot of Russians with very close links to Putin who are well integrated into the UK business and social scene and accepted because of their wealth. This level of integration in London grad in particular means that any measures now being taken by the government are not preventative, but rather constitute damage limitation. That report is clear that, as well as property holdings and ties to businesses, Russian millionaires and billionaires have direct access to parliamentarians, and that means political influence. The committee found that several members of the Russian elite who are closely linked to Putin are identified as being involved with charitable and/or political organisations in the UK, having donated to political parties with public profile, which positions them to assist Russian influence operations. It is notable that a number of members of the House of Lords have business interests linked to Russia or work directly for major Russian companies linked to the Russian state. These relationships should be carefully scrutinised, given the potential for the Russian state to exploit them. Ironically, just days after this report was released, Boris Johnson awarded a life peerage to this man. His name is Evgeny Lebedev, now Baron Lebedev. He sits in the House of Lords, giving him a direct hand in the creation of British law. Lebedev just happens to be the son of this guy, Alexander Lebedev. He is a Russian oligarch and former KGB agent. In 2008, Forbes estimated his fortune at $3.1 billion. Alexander and Evgeny own the Independent and Evening Standard newspapers, and many in Parliament and the civil service thought the peerage was a payback for the Evening Standard's pro-Johnson position. The connection between the Tories and Russian billionaires, of course, goes way beyond the Lebedevs. The party has close ties to multiple members of the Russian super rich. One of those is Alexander Temerko, who held positions in the Russian Ministry of Defense and who has donated more than £1.3 million to the Conservative Party. The Times reported that Electoral Commission records show that 6 members of the cabinet and 8 junior ministers received tens of thousands of pounds from individuals or businesses with links to Russia. The donations were made either to them or their constituency parties. There's no suggestion that any of these donations were improper, and they were all legally declared, but it lends credence to the American position that both the UK and the Tory party specifically are too dependent on Russian wealth to really carry out effective sanctions against the country. And we are talking here about big money. Transparency International has identified £5 billion worth of London property brought with suspicious wealth. At least £1 billion of that is linked to Russia. Major British banks have also been found to have aided in Russian money laundering. In 2017, it was revealed that British high street banks had processed almost $740 million from Russian money laundering operations with links to the Russian government and the KGB. But Britain has never been serious about stopping illicit Russian wealth from entering the country, either through property or the banking system. Even after Russian agents carried out the Salisbury poisoning, the Conservative government refused to crack down on Russian money laundering. Vladimir Ashokov, a Russian dissident, explains why.
Of course, there is the lobby of enablers of kleptocrats. These lawyers, property estate agents, bankers that service this corrupt flow. Even in a democratic political system like Britain's, there are special interests that would like to skew the government policy in a certain direction. And one of such influences is, of course, that Britain would turn a blind eye to corrupt money.
There it is. The Tories turn a blind eye to corrupt money. Why? Because they benefit from it. Now, I should be clear that the intended sort of importance of what we've talked about in this section isn't because I think our government isn't being tough enough on Russia vis-a-vis what's going on in Ukraine. As we've talked about on previous shows, I think there is a lot of sort of dishonest, misguided sort of attempts to demonize Russia to the extent of saying we need to be as tough as we possibly can because they're going to invade and annex Ukraine. Now, I don't think that's going to happen. Keir Starmer said yesterday we should be putting sanctions on Russia now. I think giving them nothing to lose would be a silly decision if what you're trying to do is deter them from entering Ukraine. You want to have what's called off-ramps. That's what's called in like diplomatic terms. You need to give them a way out of this situation to reduce the tension. If you put sanctions on them now, that won't do that. But the broader importance here, I think, is both that it shows the hypocrisy of the government when they talk about being tough on Russia, but also if you look at what's going on here, this isn't just like trade with Russia. You know, this isn't me saying, oh, if we were serious about Russia, we wouldn't do all of this legitimate trade with them. No, this money, which is going into London and the UK, is essentially being stolen from the Russian people, right? So this is our government not just supporting, Russia in the abstract, but they are propping up a system whereby Russian elites are stealing money from their own people, all because it profits financial interests in the City of London. And what's more, a barrier to them clamping down on that is not only that, as we know, the Conservatives and whoever is in government generally tends to be quite close to financial interests, but also they get direct money from people who are in these Russian elite circles to finance their own political parties. So we have a situation where not only is the government being incredibly hypocritical when it says we're tough on Russia, because actually they're very kind to many Russian oligarchs, but also even abstracted from what's going on in Ukraine, we are supporting precisely those parts of the Russian establishment, the Russian elite, which are most toxic, the ones who are stealing money from their people.